It was past midnight when Olivia Hart, once the rising star CEO of a billion-dollar tech firm, sat trembling on a park bench outside the corporate building she used to run. The cold night air wrapped around her, but it couldn't compare to the chill of rejection from her own family. She held her small duffel bag close, and her other hand rested gently on her stomach. 6 months pregnant, disgraced, downed, discarded. Her father, the chairman of the company, had fired her the moment he found out she was pregnant and unmarried. "You've embarrassed the family, Olivia," he said. "You're not fit to lead anything." No one had asked her how she felt. No one had asked if she was okay. Everyone left. Everyone except him. Earlier that evening, Paul Ramirez, the quiet janitor who cleaned the executive floors, noticed her sitting in the dark hallway, reedy and motionless. He had seen her on magazine covers, commanding boardrooms, smiling beside investors. But now she looked like a lost child. "You okay, Miss Hart?" he asked gently. Olivia startled, then tried to regain composure, but failed. "Do I look okay?" she snapped, then instantly regretted it. "Sorry, I have nowhere to go." Paul didn't flinch. He just gave a quiet nod. "Well, my couch is lumpy, but it's clean, and my daughter makes a mean grilled cheese." Paul lived in a tiny 2-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, working nights, so he could be home during the day for his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie. His wife had passed from cancer years ago, and since then, it had been just the two of them, navigating life with quiet resilience. He didn't ask Olivia many questions. He didn't pry. He just handed her a clean towel, a soft blanket, and said, "Take the bed. I snore too loud." Anyway, that night, Olivia cried, not from fear or loneliness, but because for the first time in weeks, someone had shown her kindness without asking anything in return. Days turned into weeks. Olivia helped Sophie with homework. She learned how to cook arroz callo from Paul. She picked up part-time work at a local bookshop under a different name. The former CEO who once wore tailored suits and designer heels now wore fuzzy socks and hair ties from the dollar store. And she'd never felt more human or more whole. One evening as she folded laundry with Paul, she asked, "Why are you helping me? I'm not your responsibility." Paul looked at her warm eyes meeting hers. "Because someone once helped me when I had nothing. I'm just passing it on." Then came the twist. One afternoon, Paul picked Sophie up from school and came home to find news cameras outside his apartment. Somehow, someone had discovered Olivia's location. Her family's PR team was in a frenzy, more concerned about damage control than her well-being. Olivia stood frozen inside the apartment, stomach round with life, eyes wide with panic. Paul walked past the reporters, grabbed Olivia's hand, and calmly said, "Come on, we're going to fix this." But instead of hiding, he helped her speak out. Olivia went public, not as a disgraced CEO, but as a human. She gave an interview not with tears, but with truth. She spoke about the pressures women in power face, about compassion, about motherhood, and about how dignity shouldn't depend on someone's last name, salary, or situation. The interview went viral. People rallied behind her. Former employees, women's rights groups, and even her company's board called for her reinstatement. But she said no because something had changed. She no longer wanted to run an empire built on cold steel and empty boardrooms. Instead, she partnered with Paul. Yes, the janitor, and launched a non-profit that provided safe housing and career support for pregnant women kicked out by families or jobs. They named it Haven and Heart. Paul handled operations. Olivia led strategy. Sophie chose the color scheme. And a few months later, in a hospital room filled with laughter and hope, Olivia gave birth to a baby boy, founded by the only family that mattered. Final scene at the ribbon cutting of their second shelter. Olivia stood beside Paul holding her baby in one arm and Sophie's hand in the other. A reporter asked Miss Hart. "If you could go back and change what happened, would you?" She smiled. "No, because in losing everything I thought I needed, I found everything I truly wanted." Moral: kindness doesn't come from status. It comes from the heart. And sometimes the people the world overlooks are the ones who will save. The clock had long ticked past midnight when Olivia Hart, once the celebrated CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, sat shivering on a splintered park bench outside the gleaming corporate tower she used to command. The October night air bit at her exposed hands, but it was nothing compared to the icy sting of her family's rejection. Her fingers clutched a worn duffel bag, its zipper strained against the few possessions she'd managed to grab, her tailored suits replaced by a mismatched sweater and jeans. Her other hand rested protectively on her rounded stomach, 6 months pregnant, the faint flutter of her baby's kicks the only warmth she could feel. Disgraced, dethroned, discarded. Her father, the company's chairman, had summoned her to his office that morning, his voice sharp as a blade. "You've humiliated us, Olivia," he'd said, his eyes avoiding hers. "Pregnant, unmarried. You're unfit to lead." Not a single person had asked how she felt, her heart pounding with fear, her body heavy with new life. No one asked if she was okay. They'd all turned away. All except him. Earlier that evening, Paul Ramirez, the soft-spoken janitor who polished the executive floors, had found her in the darkened hallway of the top floor. She sat slumped against the wall, her mascara-streaked face a stark contrast to the polished woman he'd seen on magazine covers, her confident smile lighting up boardrooms and investor galas. Now, her shoulders hunched, her breath uneven, she looked like a child lost in a storm. "You okay, Miss Hart?" Paul's voice was low, steady, like the hum of a distant train. Olivia flinched, her heart racing as she tried to summon the steel she once wielded in negotiations. "Do I look okay?" she snapped, her voice cracking like thin ice. Instantly, shame flooded her, and she whispered, "I'm sorry. I have nowhere to go." Her words hung in the air, fragile and raw. Paul didn't recoil. He met her gaze with quiet warmth, his dark eyes carrying no judgment. "Well," he said, rubbing the back of his neck, "my couch is lumpy, but it's clean. And my daughter makes a mean grilled cheese." Paul's home was a cramped 2-bedroom apartment on the city's edge, where the hum of traffic never quite stopped. He worked nights to be there for his 10-year-old daughter, Sophie, during the day, a routine carved out after his wife's death from cancer 4 years prior. The apartment smelled faintly of lemon cleaner and fresh laundry, a testament to Paul's quiet resilience in keeping their world together. He didn't probe Olivia with questions or linger on her fall from grace. Instead, he handed her a faded but soft towel and a quilt that smelled faintly of lavender. "Take the bed," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "I snore too loud anyway." That night, as Olivia sank into the worn mattress, the weight of her unraveling life pressed against her chest. But it wasn't fear or loneliness that broke her. It was the unexpected kindness of a stranger, a man who owed her nothing yet offered her everything. Tears slipped down her cheeks, hot and silent, pooling on the pillow as she realized she hadn't felt safe in weeks. Days bled into weeks. Olivia found herself folding into Paul and Sophie's small, warm world. She sat cross-legged on the living room floor, helping Sophie with math homework, her laughter bubbling up as Sophie teased her for forgetting long division. She learned to cook arroz caldo from Paul, the steam from the pot warming her face as he patiently explained how to balance ginger and garlic. At a local bookshop, under the alias Liv, she stacked shelves and rang up customers, her once manicured hands now dusted with paper cuts, her designer heels traded for sneakers and fuzzy socks from the dollar store. Each small act, tying her hair back with a cheap elastic, stirring soup, laughing at Sophie's terrible puns, stitched her fractured self back together. She felt human again, not a headline or a scandal, but a woman rediscovering her own heartbeat. One evening, as she and Paul folded laundry on the sagging couch, the scent of fabric softener mingling with the faint hum of a radio, Olivia's voice trembled. "Why are you helping me?" she asked, her hands pausing on a tiny pair of Sophie's jeans. "I'm not your responsibility." Paul looked up, his warm brown eyes meeting hers, steady as always. "Because someone helped me when I had nothing," he said softly. "A neighbor took me in when I was a kid, no questions asked. I'm just passing it on." His words landed like a stone in still water, rippling through her. For the first time, she saw the weight he carried too, the grief of loss, the quiet strength of raising Sophie alone, yet he gave without expecting anything back. Then came the unraveling. One afternoon, Paul returned from picking Sophie up at school to find news vans clogging the street outside their apartment. Flashbulbs popped like gunfire, and reporters' voices buzzed like hornets. Someone had leaked Olivia's whereabouts. Her family's PR team descended, their polished statements more concerned with the company's stock price than her well-being. Inside the apartment, Olivia stood frozen, her hands cradling her now prominent belly, her pulse hammering in her ears. The world she'd escaped was clawing her back. Sophie clung to her side, wide-eyed, while Paul pushed through the chaos, his calloused hand finding hers. "Come on," he said, his voice a steady anchor. "We're going to fix this." But instead of hiding her away, he urged her to reclaim her voice. With his quiet encouragement, Olivia faced the cameras, not as the fallen CEO, but as a woman, raw and unbroken. In a small community center, under harsh fluorescent lights, she gave an interview that poured out of her like a dam breaking. She spoke of the crushing expectations on women in power, the shame heaped on her for choosing motherhood, the dignity every person deserved regardless of status. Her voice shook, but her words were steady, her eyes bright with truth. The interview exploded across the internet. Strangers shared her story, former employees sent messages of support, women's rights groups rallied, and even her company's board issued a public apology, begging her to return. But Olivia's heart had shifted. The sterile boardrooms and cold ambition no longer called to her. Instead, she turned to Paul, the man who'd seen her when she was invisible. Together, they founded Haven and Heart, a non-profit offering safe housing and career support for pregnant women cast out by families or employers. Paul managed operations with his quiet efficiency, Olivia shaped the vision with her strategic mind, and Sophie, with her unyielding enthusiasm, picked a cheerful palette of blues and yellows for the shelters. Months later, in a hospital room filled with Sophie's giggles and Paul's steady presence, Olivia gave birth to a baby boy, his tiny hand curling around her finger as she wept with a joy she'd never known. The ribbon cutting for their second shelter, Olivia stood under a bright spring sky, her son cradled in one arm, Sophie's hand clasped in the other. Paul stood beside her, his quiet smile a tether to the life they'd built. A reporter pushed a microphone forward. "Ms. Hart, if you could go back and change what happened, would you?" Olivia's gaze softened, her heart full as she looked at her son's tiny face, Sophie's bright eyes, and Paul's steady presence. "No," she said, her voice clear and warm. "In losing everything I thought I needed, I found everything I truly wanted."